Good morning to you all, and thank you for joining us. My name is Howard Katchen, and I'm here with my co-host and fellow moderator for this Fair Housing Program, Villa Litovsky. We are both members of the C.A.R. Equal Opportunities Housing and Diversity Committee. And today we are presenting to you a very important discussion on fair housing, because especially for us realtors, it is incumbent upon each and every one of us to abide by and make sure that we maintain fair housing regulations and are entirely diverse and inclusive in everybody with whom we deal with and the way in which we deal with them. So joining us today are two accomplished and distinguished speakers who will be addressing issues on fair housing. The format for today will be somewhat a casual discussion, as it were, in which Vilma and I will be proposing questions to our two panelists, and they in turn will discuss issues around fair housing. In addition, if you have any comments or any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat below. At this point, I would like to have the privilege of introducing, giving the background of one of our distinguished panelists, and that is Farrah Wilder. Farrah Wilder is the California Association of Realtors Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer. Farrah supports C.A.R.'s fair housing and inclusion efforts. She collaborates with internal and external partners and key stakeholders, including C.A.R. members, realtor associations, and others on initiatives that will dramatically heighten awareness, allyship, equity, and capabilities within the realtor community, the real estate industry, and beyond. Prior to working for C.A.R., was a realtor herself with Compass and founder of a real estate team based in Oakland, California. Farrah served on the boards of the Oakland and Oakland Berkeley Association of Realtors from 2014 through 2017 and was 2018 chair of C.A.R.'s federal committee. She was a founding member of the Bridge Association of Realtors Housing Committee, a group that has advised on home buying assistance programs, lobbied local government officials to prioritize down payment assistance programs and the needs of small housing providers in their budget and policy directives, and created a successful closing cost grant for first-time home buyers. Farrah earned a Bachelor of Arts in Sociology from the University of Michigan, Go Wolverines, and a JD from the University of Wisconsin in Madison, on Wisconsin. As an attorney, she worked for San Francisco nonprofit Equal Rights Advocates and the United States Department of Education Office for Civil Rights. That is our Farrah Wilder, and we're pleased to have her with us today. And now Vilma will introduce Alexia Smokler.
Thank you, Howard. And hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. And like Howard says, it's a very important event that we have put together for you as a part of our education requirements. And my name is Vilma Litovsky. I'm the chair of Fair Housing Subcommittee, along with Howard. And today, it is my privilege to introduce to you this amazing person who is the director of Fair Housing Policy and Programs at the National Association of Realtors, Alexia Smokler. She's based in Washington, D.C., and she communicates C.A.R. positions of fair housing to Congress and federal agencies. Alexia also manages C.A.R.'s ACT initiative, which emphasizes accountability, culture, change of training to advance fair housing in the industry. Before joining NAR, Alexia worked in fair housing enforcement at HUD. Alexia worked in fair housing enforcement at HUD on the staff of Congressman John Conyers Jr. with a nonprofit civil rights organization. Please, let's welcome Alexia Smokler. Alexia, please take it away.
Anyway, at this point, we will begin with our questions. Are our panelists ready? I see that they're all starry-eyed, fingers up, and ready, willing, and able. And the first question I have, I would like to address to Farrah Wilder, and that is, C.A.R., the California Association of Realtors, just issued an apology for discriminatory policies in the past. What did C.A.R. do in the past, and why apologize?
Thank you, Howard. And I think it's just a very timely question, because I think this is actually huge news. It's a really big deal. And, you know, I had the privilege of supporting the organization through this process. And I first will tell you how to find the apology. So first of all, C.A.R. members, if you haven't checked your email, it should be there. And I remember I was a California realtor for, am I freezing to you? You're freezing to me. Okay, good. Well, I was a California realtor for many years, and I know how the emails can get a little out of control, but you should have a special message from the president there. I think it went out in one of our newsletters. And if you go to C.A.R.'s website across the banner, there's a red alert, and you can see the text of the apology there. And so before we talk about the apology, I think it would be helpful to talk about C.A.R.'s history. And so if I can share my screen, I just want to kind of touch on, you know, some of what realtors did in the past, so you can understand why we have gotten to the place where, or what we are apologizing about, and then we can talk about why apologize. And maybe Alexia can help me with that. So let's see, I'm gonna see if I can share my screen. Okay, I hope nothing pops up on this screen. Oh, here we go. This is just the presentation. Okay. Okay, so this is, if you've seen this presentation before, I apologize, but I do think that it's kind of one of the best nutshells of who realtors began as. So C.A.R. started as the California State Realty Federation, and you'll see the term also CREA in some places, California Real Estate Association. So those were names that C.A.R. had in the past. And at its origins in 1905, this was an exclusively white male organization, and it was exclusive. I mean, not even it did not even accept all white men, and they called themselves the Realty Men. And the women's division was started in the 20s, and we still, you know, kind of have we have Women Up, we have Women's Council Realtors in our California realtor community, you know, to promote women in leadership, but it harkens back to this time period where women were not allowed into the organization, and then even once they were, you know, it still was a very, you know, a predominantly white and male organization, and exclusively white, I should say. And then until the 60s, you can see at the bottom, by all accounts, realtor associations had exclusively white memberships. And this isn't just in California. This is most local associations, California, other states, you know, kind of NAR, all across the nation. And you can see this picture where the women were doing the work there, but, you know, the men who were leading the organization are there up front. So they're doing their, I guess, their kind of secretarial work. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Oop, that went the wrong way. All right. So let's see. So I want to skip that slide and go to kind of the early fair housing activities of realtors at one point in time. And I can go back even to zoning. You know, in this country, there was a sense, and realtors promoted this idea that that integrated communities, that communities that weren't exclusively white were going to not be as valuable. So zoning laws were initially proposed, some with explicitly racial terms. And then once that wasn't the case, they found ways around that. But zoning laws were proposed to try to keep neighborhoods exclusively white. And you see that throughout California. Some of the early ones were in Berkeley and LA. And then also the Realtor Code of Ethics. This is from 1924, said that a realtor should never bring in anyone into a neighborhood of any race or nationality whose presence will clearly be detrimental to property value. So again, linking race and value, that's in the Realtor Code of Ethics. And this predates redlining. It predates the federal government policies, around race and lending. And so this was kind of embedded in the realtor culture. Restrictive covenants. So restrictive covenants were a way that a developer or a homeowners association could make a rule. And there's a lot of rules that still exist at homeowners associations, but back in the day, they and I have one highlighted, many folks throughout California have seen these rules that say that no one who isn't white or Caucasian or certain ethnicities or even religions are pointed out as not allowed in neighborhoods. And this is a terrible history, but this is what was going on for many years. And realtors actually promoted this. Realtors, early members of C.A.R. were developers. And so they were instrumental in kind of promoting this kind of activity. And then, of course, you get the Federal Housing Administration, and that's around the New Deal in the 30s, when there was a need to make credit and loans more affordable. And so a lot of folks were facing foreclosure, and also, to get a loan on a house, you had to put a really high interest rate, a really high down payment. Interest rates were all over the place. And so realtors were really instrumental in helping to create this new system. They were lobbying just like they do now. That was one of the initial roles of realtors, and realtors were instrumental in promoting these ideas. So here's more about restrictive covenants, fighting to keep restrictive covenants, some of the language, and I can share this with C.A.R. that realtors were using in both the Realtor magazine and when they were speaking at city council meetings, in promotion of restrictive covenants. So, you have, let's see, B.M. Johnson, chairman of the Race Restrictions Committee of the Southwest Realty Board. That's highlighted. That's from a newspaper article. So, we have realtors at local associations and, folks who are involved at the state, really promoting. This is from 1943, restrictive covenants. Okay. And so we have, newspaper articles showing how we were shaping the Federal Housing Administration, which, is the beginning of our government-backed financing system. And then redlining. So in the 20s, there were a bunch of scholars that were instrumental in helping to work with realtors and help educate realtors about appraisals. And so essentially, you had all these scholars who were talking about, how you needed to value property and how important it was to make sure that a neighborhood was exclusively white. And many of these people ended up with jobs in the Federal Housing Administration. And so culminating at the 60s, when our first California Fair Housing Law came about, Proposition 14, and I don't want to take too long on the history, but I think it's important for people who don't know what happened, is that we had our first fair housing law in California that said that private individuals could not discriminate, based on who was going to rent or live in their house, based on a few of the categories that we have now. Now in California, you have 22, but race and religion were in there. And what happened was that, this policy that realtors had, that homeowners should have the right to discriminate and that exclusively white neighborhoods were more valuable, meant that realtors organized to have a ballot measure put on the ballot for California voters that, if passed, it would create a constitutional amendment and make it unconstitutional for the state to ever ban discrimination in housing, and it passed by a 2/3 vote. And I want to say, and I have it in yellow here, that there were several realtor associations and some realtor members who actually organized against this. It was not a unanimously held viewpoint, but was this the body that it was called CREA at the time, that is now C.A.R.'s policy, and they vowed to fight it through. They did, this California and the state Supreme Court, and it was overturned. And then essentially, for a bit of time, California lost some of its housing funding. It was damaging to California in that way, and it also, these discriminatory policies are still with us, the legacy in that. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We have major home ownership gaps, racial home ownership gaps. There's bias, not just impacting people of color, but also impacting the LGBTQ+ community. So we still are grappling with the legacy. So what was this apology about? So it started, it came about as an initiative from a group of our board members who are on the diversity committee. They brought it up to us early this year, and the diversity committee has been hosting conversations, talking about it, and finally it reached our board of directors at the last business meetings, which I saw Vilma and Howard at last week, and the board voted to approve an apology. And so what the apology essentially says, and it was broader than Prop 14 eventually. At first it was just Prop 14, but it talks about all of these policies. So it essentially says we were wrong, we apologize, we condemn them, and it talks about what we did. And then also it talks about all of the things that C.A.R. has started to do, to kind of address this legacy. And I won't go into all of that. You can look at the apology online. And one final thing I'll say is that we you might have questions about, and this was part of the discussion, why would an association apologize? Why do this? And what I can say is that, for this body, it was essentially the right thing to do. Folks are feeling like, as an organization, not as individuals, but as an organization, that this is something that will reflect what our current policies actually are, where the organization actually is. And given how terrible the history is, the members really felt strongly about doing that.
Well, as I recall too, it was roughly about 4 years ago, I think around 2018, that NAR in turn had come out with their own mea culpa, their own apology about the past misdeeds in discrimination. So yeah, I think that the California Association of Realtors is now following suit, and my frank and honest opinion, it's well deserved and well overdue.
And can I say one more thing? And I know I'd love to ask Alexia a question, but one more thing is, I do want to say this. So this is not the first time that our leadership has actually acknowledged and apologized for the past. Dave Walsh issued several apologies last year. One of them in the magazine, so you can look at their housing issue and read that. But this is the first time that the organization as a whole is making this apology officially and in public. And I think Alexia has a little bit of a bird's eye view with that. She's at NAR, where they have also issued an apology, but also has seen a lot of the local association apologies that have happened recently.
Well, thank you very much, Farrah. Vilma, would you like to please pose the next question to Alexia?
If I may, just for a minute, if you don't mind, I always have something to add.
Please.
Please do.
Why does history matter? That was all a long time ago. Can't we just put it behind us? Well, I want to talk about that question. So let me get my screen share going here. So can you see that? This is one of my favorite quotes from William Faulkner. The past is never dead. It's not even past, right? The world we live in right now is shaped by what happened before us. What happened to your parents? What happened to your grandparents? That affects your opportunities in life. So when we look back at these historic policies, going back 100 years and more, supported by us and industry, supported by government at all levels, the historic exclusion, the redlining, the racial zoning, the refusal to serve by white real estate agents, the block busting. I mean, the list goes on and on, but one that I really want to emphasize because I think it's so important, we covered our code of ethics already, is after World War II. This is when there were millions of GIs coming back from serving abroad. And there was a housing shortage to house all these veterans. A lot of them were starting new families. And so the federal government, again, stepped in, provided financing for developers to build the suburbs. A lot of the suburbs you see around the country were built in the 40s and 50s. The FHA financed the builders, and then the VA financed the borrowers on the GI Bill. Well, the FHA said, if you're going to get an FHA loan to finance the building, you have to have a racially restrictive covenant in the deed. So that meant that essentially these huge new developments that were being built for the returning GIs were off limits to people who weren't white. And millions of white Americans were able to get into these homes, which were being sold at below market value because they were being subsidized on all sides, and saw those home values appreciate 2 and 3 times. By the time the Fair Housing Act passed 20 years later, the Black GIs and the immigrant GIs, they could have afforded those homes when they were first being sold. They were cheap. Those values had appreciated so much that they had become unaffordable. And so that generational wealth that was passed down in those white families, that opportunity was not given to other families, and they lost that inability to pass wealth down through their families. And so that affects their descendants today. We have some research, looking at the racial wealth gap. The average white American has about 8 times the wealth of the typical Black family and about 5 times the wealth of the typical Hispanic family, even though the typical Black family makes about 60% of the income. So you'd think they'd have 60% of the wealth, but they don't. And it's because of this failure to pass wealth down through generations. And if you look at this chart, what is just so heartbreaking to me, and folks sometimes say, well, they just need to finish college or whatever. But look at the net median household worth of a white person with a high school education only is actually higher. It's double the net worth of a Black person with a bachelor's degree and a Hispanic person with a bachelor's degree. So it's not enough to just pull yourself up by your bootstraps when we have these historic and systemic factors holding people back. So just a little more data to back this up. So we have these home ownership gaps. Right now, it's about a 30-point gap between whites and Blacks. The average is about 65%. Whites are about 10 points above that average. Asians are about 10 points below, Hispanics 20 points below, and Blacks, and so on. That gap between whites and Blacks is essentially unchanged from 50 years ago. Why? Well, this data reflects some of the research showing why. Look at where people get their down payment from. Look at what I've got circled here. White folks, about 40% of them get their down payment at least partially from the proceeds of the sale of an existing residence. Look at these other groups. It's half as much. That's because white people have been supported in their home ownership by government programs for generations. Look at who's got to tap their pension fund to support their down payment. Only 6% of white folks have to do that. 3 times as many Black folks have to tap their retirement savings for their down payment, and about twice as many Asians and Hispanics. So this is the legacy of that history, and this is why history matters. And as we endeavor to serve this diverse marketplace, we have got to acknowledge these barriers, own our role in it, and own the solution. Oops. And that's my spiel on that topic. Oops. Back to you, Vilma.
Oh, okay,
There you
thank
go.
you. My God, this is the information that I don't think I've been in the business 32 years, and you know, not being born in this country is something that I was not aware of. And this is a educational event, like we said at the beginning, to enhance our knowledge, especially being a realtor. And so thank you so much for sharing that, those slides. And my question to
Vilma,
you
may
is,
I just make one quick comment? Thank you
Sure,
very
please.
much. No, I just going to say that by being in real estate, I'm 4th generation in my family involved in real estate. And my father and my uncle, they were developers in that period you cited, post-World War II. And they built just those type of homes for returning GIs. But what differed about my uncle and my father is that they welcomed any and all buyers, any qualified buyers, to purchase the home, which led to a lot of kerfuffle, a lot of tumult, because there would be protests in front of their housing projects, even so far as people would find out where we lived, and we would find out all kinds of oddities come the morning out on our doorstep. So I certainly am one who can attest to what Alexia just addressed. So Vilma, thank you. Please carry on.
thank you. Thank you so much. Alexia, by hiring you and studying at the Fair Housing Committee of the board, NAR is taking bold moves when it comes to fair housing. Can you talk more about some of the fair housing policies that NAR advocates for?
I would be happy to. Thank you. NAR has hired Brian Breen, who is the head of fair housing enforcement at HUD for a very long time. And Brian brought me, and now we've got a couple more folks. So we're really dedicating more resources, more of a team to fair housing. And I hope that's showing up in the products and services that we've been delivering over the past couple of years. We also established a new fair housing policy committee about 3 years back. That's something that didn't exist at NAR before. It was all under the diversity committee, and they didn't have the ability to talk about federal policy, which is one of the jobs that I do here in Washington. So given all that history, I also want to talk about how our definition of fair housing has become more expansive. You know, traditionally, we've thought about it as a legal issue. It's a compliance issue. It's, you know, how can I avoid getting in trouble, and approaching it from that perspective. But we have, and I, coming from a law enforcement background, that was kind of how I approached it too. You know, what violates the law, what doesn't violate the law, that's what we care about. But we're moving into a new space. And I think it's actually a space that we've been in for a while, because we're not just advocates for realtors in the real estate industry. We're also advocates for home ownership and for homeowners and for consumers. And so a lot of these policies that I'm about to talk about, they aren't exactly new. These are things we've advocated for a while, but we're tying it up with that history now and seeing these differential impacts on different populations, and why these policies that we're advocating for are even more important and tied to fair housing. So if I may go into my screen share one more time.
Yes, sir.
So one topic that we are seeing as a fair housing issue is this inventory shortage. And I know that in California, you feel this perhaps more intensely than anywhere else in the country. And while this has been a problem in California and on the coasts for a long time, our data is now showing that it's nationwide. The inventory shortage, we're like 3 or 4 million units short, according to Fannie Mae, nationwide. We haven't been building for about 10 or 15 years. And this is really beginning to squeeze people out, and those impacts are falling differentially, again, on those who don't have that access to intergenerational wealth. So we're advocating in Washington for a number of measures that will address this housing supply problem. And it's so complex. And you in California have like multiple layers to it too, that we're not even addressing here in Washington. But we just had a presidential advisory group on this issue. And we're coming out with a number of creative ways that we can get at this problem. Now, a lot of it's local. A lot of it has to do with zoning and restrictions on how communities can build. And that's all tied up in this history of fair housing, in this history of exclusion, in this history of protecting property values in single family homes in certain neighborhoods and blocking development in those neighborhoods. That really resulted in part of this problem. So, you know, one of our recommendations, and this is a state and local topic, is, you know, but what can we do from the federal level to incentivize those state and local governments to take another look at their zoning, to lift some of these restrictions like parking requirements, minimum lot size. I'm sure you have specific permutations of this in California that limits the density of building. You know, we're also looking at how can we look at institutional investor purchases. You know, this is something that we're hearing about a lot more in the last year. And, you know, some data that we've seen shows that these institutional investors are actually focusing in on communities where people of color live and buying up homes that used to be owner occupied and turning them into rentals. What can we do about that? This is a complicated one. We're looking at some tax policy around this, but what can we do to protect home ownership and not have these owner occupied properties turned into rentals and owned by Wall Street? You know, looking at things like, can we make a tax incentive for an investor to sell to a first-time home buyer? How about converting commercial to residential? There's a lot of office buildings and restaurants that may not come back from COVID. This seems like a quick one. Can we convert some of these into residential? There's a shortage of construction workers. There's a shortage of supplies. So we have a lot of work to do, and we're looking at all these issues. One other policy area I want to just talk about really generally is increasing access to credit. So as we've talked about, you know, with the historical discrimination, the lack of access to credit in the past, the lack of intergenerational wealth, a lot of folks have what's called a thin credit file, you know, and that may be because you're from a community that doesn't use credit cards. That's just not the way you operate. How can we, and yet these folks are paying the rent on time, they're paying their utilities in time, they appear to be credit worthy, but our system of measuring credit risk doesn't seem to be capturing a lot of folks who could actually become homeowners. And so that's why we're looking at things like alternative credit scoring. Fannie and Freddie are now looking at counting someone's positive rental payment history in their underwriting. You know, right now, paying your rent is not counted towards your credit score. And that's a lot of people's biggest monthly payment. Why is that? More tools from Fannie and Freddie to make their products more accessible to limited English proficient borrowers. So translating more documents into more languages, reducing FHA's annual mortgage insurance premium. We've been making a lot of noise about this one lately, and canceling their life of loan requirement. So these are all different policies we're advancing in Washington to try to make credit more available to everyone, but particularly to folks who lack access to intergenerational wealth.
Very nice. Sarah, do you have any comments on what Alexia said?
You know, I think that we all work together on these policies, and she's right. You know, like there are policies that the federal government can do, particularly around lending, because a lot of that is, you know, kind of housed at the federal government. But, you know, and we're talking to a local association, but you can't. Oh,
no, please.
Oh, you can hear me. Okay.
Yes,
so,
yes.
But, you know, as Alexia said, and this is a really, you know, this is a plug for the folks watching who, you know, are really concerned about fair housing, have ideas, are working on these things in their community, to get involved at your local and state association. And I wasn't going to say this here because this wasn't, I usually say this in my diversity talks, but I can say this, and Vilma and I have been, engaged in a community of our Latino professionals network, but we also have other kind of diversity initiatives where we're really trying to make sure that everyone understands that at least at C.A.R.'s directors meetings and our committee meetings, every single realtor who's a member of our association is welcome to come to any open meeting and to ask for permission to comment and contribute, and can reach out to the chair. So those ideas as far as solutions or understanding the challenges or what the barriers are the things that help folks who are both leading these committees and these associations, like Howard and Vilma on these boards, and then also as staff, giving us the tools that we use to go and do research and figure out, what are these policies about and what might potential solutions be. So the reason why we have these policy objectives is because of our members. And it happens at the state, local, and federal level. So that's what I'll say about that. And come to our
Thank you.
on the website.
Well, I have another question for you, Sarah.
Sure.
And that is, the California Fair Housing Law is more extensive than federal, with 22 protected categories. What are some fair housing best practices for realtors?
So I think when it really dawned on me, and I hate to say this, when we talk about 22 protected categories, when I was working as a realtor, all these piecemeal different laws, didn't it dawn on me that when you total everything up, there are 22 protected categories in California. And I think even folks who, are really conscientious, might not be able to name even half if you caught them on the spot. And so we do have, I have tips. We actually have some support as far as resources for you to help make sure that you are in compliance, and also your clients are doing the right thing. And I know every realtor that I know, everyone who's a member holds themselves to a higher standard of professionalism and wants to make sure that they're doing the right thing and treating everyone fairly. But we also know that sometimes implicit bias can creep in. Sometimes, you may not be aware of a certain nuance of a law, particularly around disability accommodations. And so we do have resources for you. So one thing I will say before I share my screen again is that there's this toolkit. And so this toolkit, Fair Housing Toolkit for Realtors, I can put a little later on in the session a link to the updated version. This went out in our magazine during the Fair Housing Month, and it includes all of the protected categories listed, the penalties for a fair housing violation, some FAQs, and then also a list of resources. We have updated this because there's been some names, the state agency changed its name, the penalties have changed, but the information is still very good and still works. And we also will put an updated one in the chat. Another resource is to rely on the Fair Housing and Discrimination Advisory that is linked to every single purchase agreement, every single listing agreement, and every single lease agreement. And so that's for all of our members. A member benefit is the forms, and that is there. And so look at that, go through that with your client, make sure they understand what their responsibilities are. And now I have a few more to share. And I know training, sometimes we sell out, like we have standing room only at Gov's trainings for the forms. Think of your fair housing trainings like that, your implicit bias trainings like that. This is helping to make sure you I hate to make this a risk management thing. It is a risk management thing, but it's also the right thing to do. So understanding bias, because it's confusing and complicated, is really important. And we'll talk about some of those resources that both C.A.R. and N.A.R. have to help folks with those kinds of training. So let's see if I go the right direction. Okay, so we went way back. So let me see if I can. So diversify your marketing. And actually, I have a different slide that really even fleshes this out. You really want to show all of the potential consumers, potential customers, that you welcome them, you value them, and that you're there to serve them too. So, think about the pictures you have in your marketing, think about the language you're using in your listings, or if you have a personal, kind of ad, make sure you're not sounding like you have a preference for one group and not another. So, you see enlisting advertisements, sometimes you'll see this would be great for, this is right by the university, great for professors, or this is, this is a great place for empty nesters or young kids, or whatever it is, families with kids. This is all of those, here in California, familial status is a protected category. There are other things that might mean that, if you're saying professors, would that mean students aren't welcome, or folks, who have different demographic categories? Any arbitrary characteristic has, under some circumstances seen as a protected category in California. So you want to be careful with your marketing. And so just kind of pay attention to kind of the messages that are going out there. And also, maybe consider how to invite folks in and showing that diversity and showing, who you work with, and even making a statement that says that you value diversity and fair housing, because that would suggest to folks, look, I am welcome here. This person values my business, and, I should work here. And for the brokers, kind of consider, how to, maybe look at the pictures on the website, or who's working there. Are there gaps? Are there language capacities that aren't being met? Are there ways to make sure that, all different kinds of needs are better supported on the team? And I will say this because that is a part of marketing. When you see the website, and when someone's looking to work with a realtor and they're wondering, can this person, help support my needs, whether they are understanding of, disability accommodations, all those kinds of things, would go into, making sure that your marketing is diverse and inclusive. So that's one real, kind of concrete way that you can do something about fair housing. Develop diverse market skills and resources. And so, I'm using the word diverse, and folks go, diversity and fair housing, are those the same thing? Or are they two different things? They're two different things, but diversity can actually support fair housing. And so we often talk about them interchangeably. And this comes from a diversity talk that I gave, but I think that these also support fair housing. So Alexia talked quite a bit about the generational wealth differentials between communities of color and white, and the white community. And so learning about first-time buyer programs that help bridge the gap, that help folks with not a lot of down payment, can be really helpful. And we have some statistics as to why. Latinos are twice as likely to purchase a home with FHA than non-Hispanic white buyers. 61% of Black borrowers rely on non-conventional loans like FHA. Black households are more than twice as likely to have student loan debt than white ones. So also get in touch or make partnerships with HUD counselors and lenders who know down payment assistance programs. So I have 3 R's in referral. I do know how to spell that word, but anyhow, so anyhow, or maybe, you might know someone who is really involved with a lot of first-time buyers. They know the programs, they know how to do all the ins and outs. It really is sometimes complex. Maybe that's not, if you work with investors, that's not your need. Connect with these folks who you might have a referral relationship with, because what you don't want to do is the third thing here on the slide. Tell someone that they can't buy. And maybe it's because you might not be aware of all the programs. You don't know that there are loan programs that allow for folks with a lower credit score, or you can come in with 0% down if you kind of layer the programs. There's a Section 8 home ownership program that a lot of people don't know about. So, and if the market is rising or interest rates are rising, someone might lose an opportunity to either get in there or buy affordably. So, and I have a bunch of statistics that really kind of support these concepts. And then other things that you can do. So we talked about hiring, partnership, with your team, being inclusive. One thing I will say is that having folks who are from different communities and backgrounds on your team and your brokerage or in your referral network means that you are better able to understand maybe the fair housing challenges of certain communities. And there are a lot of different communities in California. We're not just talking Black and white or even Latino. There are groups that come from very different places, have very different needs. We are talking about things that aside from race. And so having an inclusive business means that you're kind of getting a better understanding of all of these different nuances that occur in the market. And so some of these other things have to do with allyship and mentorship. So I will stop there.
Well, Sarah, may I ask if you would kindly share with us and those of us who are in attendance here, just some or all of the 22 classes that make up the fair housing regulation.
Sure. And you know what? I forgot a few other tips that weren't on here. And I'll ask about, but first I'll tell you some of the things that people might not be aware of. So source of income is new, and we've talked a lot about that in our community, but what they're finding with fair housing testing is that source of income discrimination is extremely common. And there's been some news stories actually about some of these tests in California. And unfortunately, there are a lot of folks, they'll send kind of a secret shopper, or they'll make a phone call and they'll say, I have a voucher. And, it's very common for these folks to be discriminated against. And actually racial discrimination is still very common when they, people with certain names that might stereotypically suggest a certain race, that's very common. But other things are gender identity and gender expression. In California, sexual orientation and gender identity and expression are protected categories. Marital status, immigration status, citizenship, primary language. What else is maybe not always on the radar? So any arbitrary characteristic, that is something that, the state of California has found, when maybe it wasn't a characteristic that was in those categories, but still, that was the reason, so you have to be really careful, because if there's a complaint, it could raise the question as to whether California law will still, prohibit that particular kind of discrimination. So another best practice, a couple other ones that will help avoid that is making sure you have consistent business practices with any new client. For example, if you have a new client, you do the same thing every time, maybe have a intake sheet where you find out what they're looking for, not making assumptions, and doing the same thing. If you have a policy of not showing property until folks get pre-approved, do that with everyone, because you never know when someone might be a fair housing tester. And I know some days you have busy days, some days you have light days, but that could be the distinction between a fair housing tester. And then making sure that you show folks every single thing that is in their price range that meets their criteria. So, and if they want to restrict neighborhoods, let them do that, or schools, because otherwise, sometimes we have our own biases, and our biases may just be like, look, I love this school. My kids went there. I'm going to show people houses right there. But if you're doing that, and maybe sometimes you do it and sometimes you don't, that could be considered steering. Again, different treatment could be a fair housing issue. So I do want to kind of mention that anything you can do to be consistent, give the consumer the decision making, ability is going to help you, and also really be up on how you make a complaint, so that if anyone ever feels that they're being discriminated against, that you can give them that resource.
Thank you, Sarah. I also like to share and to piggyback on what you said. C.A.R. offers this event called Transaction Rescue. And that event has different lenders with different programs, down payment assistance, grants. So if it's a benefit from C.A.R., they can find that on the website. So I have attended, I have been on the panel, and it's an excellent program. So thank you for sharing that information, Farrah.
Of course, no, we absolutely love that one too. And Mark Farfel is a great resource, like for anyone who has questions about down payment assistance. programs.
Well,
So I believe it's Howard's turn.
oh, no, actually, your turn.
It's my turn.
For
Okay.
Alexia.
Okay, here's the wonderful Alexia that has all the answers for us from NAR. So NAR has a number of tools to help realtors with fair housing. Can you talk about those benefits, Alexia, please?
I'd be happy to. Let's get some screen share going here. So this is the initiative that I've been leading for the past couple of years. It's called our ACT Fair Housing Initiative. It stands for Accountability, Culture Change, and Training. This is us shoring up our own house, looking at ourselves and making sure that we are offering the training, the tools, the resources, and that we're holding ourselves accountable, so that we don't need, someone else to do that for us. So why did we launch this program, and why did our leadership team allocate the resources it has to it? Well, it happened after the Newsday investigation out of Long Island, late in 2019. For those of you who follow fair housing closely, I'm sure you've heard about this. If you haven't, it's a must-see. It's testers with hidden cameras talking to real estate agents. Now, Farrah's mentioned testers, but just briefly, the way testing works is it's like a secret shopper. Two people posing as home seekers go into your office. They have the same qualifications. They're looking for the same kind of a house in the same location. The only difference between them is the characteristic that we're testing on. That could be race, could be national origin, could be disability, and so forth. So in Newsday, a newspaper had heard that real estate agents were steering clients on Long Island. Long Island is a very diverse place in total, but those diverse populations are really segregated into different neighborhoods. And at Newsday, they'd heard anecdotally, and I think maybe even some of their reporters had experienced real estate agents steering them into the neighborhoods that corresponded to their identity. And so they hooked up with the foremost testing group in the country and the foremost fair housing law professor, and ran this 3-year investigation with hidden cameras. And you need to see the footage. You need to see the documentary. It's a case study in what not to do if you want to stay on the right side of fair housing law. If you search Google Newsday Long Island Divided, you will find it. So this investigation fell on us like a bombshell. It made national news. It was cited on Capitol Hill. In New York, their state legislature passed all kinds of legislation. They were subpoenaing agents and brokers to testify before their state legislature. So we saw immediately that we had to do better. We had to do a lot better. And so we proposed this series of initiatives to answer what we saw in those videos. So just to go through very briefly some of the projects that we're working on at NAR. Oh, right, Newsday. Let me just, these were the results of the investigation. They found that 40% of the time, the white tester and the tester of color were treated differently. That's almost half the time when the tester was Black, about 40% when the tester was Hispanic, and about 20% of the time when the tester was Asian. How were they treated differently? Oh, darn it, I guess I took that slide out. They were steered. They were shown different listings. They were shown fewer listings. They were told different things about crime, neighborhoods, and schools. It's all on camera. It's embarrassing. So accountability is number one, right? We have to show that we're taking care of these problems. So these are some of the programs that we've rolled out. I want to call out this middle one first, is our Federal Advocacy for Fair Housing Enforcement. So when our members do their fly-in every year to Washington to go and talk to their members of Congress about all our realtor priorities, one of the things that we ask for is more money for federal fair housing enforcement. We want enforcement. We do not want this behavior in our industry. We want this behavior to be policed. That is our position. In that same spirit, we have rolled out a self-testing program for real estate brokerages. Now, this is a service that we are offering to a broker. if a broker wants to see how his or her own agents are complying with fair housing law, the way we have it set up is that we have a partnership with a national testing group, and they will enter into an agreement with the broker, do the testing. We don't know about it. It's confidential. The broker receives a confidential report. The testing entity may not bring any enforcement actions against the broker. This is all kept private so that the broker can see what's going on and address any problems. Then there's follow-up training or whatever might be needed to address the problems that are found. We just finished the pilot of this program, and we've got a lot of interest from brokers around the country, who say, yes, I want to see what's going on. I'm not going to look the other way, because of course the broker can be held liable in a lot of these situations. Then we also have a project where we looked at the licensing laws of all 50 states to see how they measured up against best practices. Oh, look, these slides got mixed up. There's the Newsday thing. To see how they measure up against best practices in fair housing education and enforcement. Now, in California, your laws are pretty strict. But in other states, we found that about only half the states require any fair housing training to get a real estate license. And 2/3 of the states don't require any fair housing CE at all. So in a lot of the country, you can have your license and have a real estate career with just minimal fair housing training. And if there's anything we know about implicit bias, is that even the best meaning, most well-intentioned person can still trip up and make a mistake. So we passed policy at our May meetings urging our state associations to take a look at their licensing law and strengthen the education requirements if they are weak. And also to take a look at their enforcement regimes. What happens when somebody has a fair housing violation? How does the Real Estate Commission handle that? People say, well, I can't discriminate, I'll lose my license. But from what we've seen, that rarely, if ever, happens. And we believe that, there should be discipline against the license if someone has a fair housing violation. So moving on to the culture change part of ACT, we have introduced a new Fair Housing Champion Award. And the idea here is to elevate, lift up, and show as an example folks who are not only abiding by the law, but who are going above and beyond to expand home ownership to these communities that have been historically underrepresented. So do we have time for me to show a short video? It's like 3 minutes. All right, let's hope this works in my screen share.
When I first started in real estate, other agents at my firm didn't want to show buyers property near downtown Durham because they considered it to be a dangerous place. Downtown Durham probably has the highest population of people of color. I decided to start Urban Durham because I wanted a place that felt like it was invested in the community. And one of the things that we did from the day we opened our doors is we have a policy where for every transaction that's closed, we have that agent make a donation to a local nonprofit. Marcelle Thomas joined Urban Durham a few years ago, and from the moment she walked into our office, she has been bringing us amazing projects to work on, and we love her for it.
I work with a lot of first-time homebuyers, many whom are minority. Everything from going to classes on improving their credit to going to the self-help credit union.
One of the biggest obstacles for buyers is coming up with cash for closing. We really wanted our 2021 fundraising goal to be about helping to reduce the racial home ownership gap. And we are going to partner with the National Association of Real Estate Brokers to help provide closing cost loans for Black home buyers in the Durham area. We are worse off now in terms of the Black-white racial homeownership disparity than we were 50 years ago. And a lot of that is due to the 2008 subprime loans, where Black homeowners were twice as likely as white homeowners to have a subprime loan, meaning that they were disproportionately at risk for losing their home. Once people have this asset of their home, we feel firmly that not to sell the house. is the right choice in many cases. But it can be really hard to keep up their home.
And there are so many people in that position, so many people.
Marcel introduced me to Jessica Barnes, a single mom with 2 kids who inherited her home from her father.
Her father was too ill to maintain the home anymore, and literally everything was broken.
So we essentially completely gutted the house and renovated it. We probably had bit off more than we could chew because we are not in the construction business, but the home was fabulous after. We care a lot about fair housing, and I think that that shows in our values, and it does earn us a lot of business because people care a lot about that.
I'm sorry, we had 2 fair housing champions this past year from California, and I'm sorry I didn't get to update this to show them to you. Sabrina Brown, the fabulous Sabrina Brown, and Rafael Perez both won this award this current year. And we are going to be opening applications for next year this November. So if you know anybody who is a fair housing champion, who is advancing home ownership in their business, it does not have to be a volunteer work. It can, in fact, it's great if it's in your business and you're seeing that value proposition of expanding home ownership in your business. We will be accepting applications this November, so look out for that. The prize is $5,000 awarded to the housing-related nonprofit of the winner's choice. So just to go through a couple more things here. Oh, I keep disappearing when I do that. So we have introduced a lot of training these last 2 years, two major training programs. Bias Override is our most recent training program. Bias Override teaches us about how our brain's unconscious association of people with different groups with stereotypes can lead us down the road to a fair housing violation. We all do this. Our brains use shortcuts all the time. It helps us make sense of all the information that's coming at us at any given moment. I read somewhere that your brain is processing something like 11 million bits of information per second, but your conscious brain can only handle 40 bits of information. So your unconscious brain is doing all this work for you. And if your main exposure to folks from different groups is from media and culture, we know that certain groups are represented in a way that doesn't accurately reflect who they are. So certain groups might be associated with criminality, and that's what resides in our brain as a shortcut, perhaps even, without us consciously believing that. And so implicit biases can lead us down the road to steering, making assumptions. Like Farrah said, if you're making assumptions about people instead of listening to that client and addressing their individual needs, you might end up steering someone. You might end up denying someone equal service because perhaps you're assuming someone isn't qualified and you're assuming somebody else is. So this course is now available nationwide for 3 hours of CE credit once it gets approved. I know that is a long process in California. And I think Farrah might mention another option you have to fulfill your new implicit bias training requirement. And then the other major training that NAR has released in the last 2 years is Fairhaven. I hope you've all been there, but if you haven't, Fairhaven is an interactive online scenario exercise where you're in a fictional town, you're working against the clock to sell real estate, and you're going to confront different situations where you may encounter discrimination. These are all based on real fair housing cases, frequently asked questions that we get from our members. And the idea is, we want to get away from the kind of fair housing training where you're seeing a list of protected classes and a list of provisions in a statute. about what you're supposed to do, but without any context. That type of training goes in one ear and out the other. So we want a training that really resonated, and scenario-based training helps you see how these principles can be applied in your daily business. Now, another really important aspect of Fairhaven is that sometimes we flip the script. Now you're going through the scenario in the position of a client who's being discriminated against, and you have to go through and make the decisions that person would have to make. We pair those with video testimonials from real people who have experienced housing discrimination. And the goal here was really to elicit an emotional reaction from the learner, that people could feel just maybe even a little bit the harm that discrimination causes in real people's lives. And the feedback we've gotten has been that people are angry, people are in tears when we go through this training. And that's what we want. We've really set the bar high, and we want people to come out of this training not just having improved their fair housing knowledge, but really seeing the world a little bit differently and feeling recommitted to upholding these values of fair housing in their business. We've got a lot more where that's coming from. Fairhaven's probably going to get an expansion next year. And I've got a team now. So keep your eyes on this space, because more is coming.
Thank you so much for sharing that information for us.
Yeah, no,
Kevin, I have taken that class myself, and I recommend that to every realtor. There's so much knowledge and so much that we are missing that we don't know. And I'm sorry, the background here is we have a board of directors meeting today. So I'm gonna give it to Howard, and I'm gonna put myself on mute.
boy, it sounds like they're having fun. I wish I was over there. Anyway, I have a question for you, Farrah. What are some of C.A.R's big fair housing initiatives?
There's so much that we do with fair housing, and so I'll just mention a few. One thing that I'm really, really excited to have helped work on is our closing cost grant. And, you know, we talked about the importance of down payment assistance programs, and there are special down payment assistance programs called special purpose credit programs that can be targeted to groups that, you know, for certain purposes. You know, maybe they have an additional barrier or a very specific barrier or historic discrimination. So we have a closing cost grant that is available in a lot of markets in California, including LA County, and we're trying to expand it throughout the state, you know, going forward. And this started, we developed it last year, rolled it out this year. And essentially, if folks are a member of an underserved community, and there's a definition for that, and they don't make more than 120% area median income, they can get a grant of up to $10,000 for their closing costs. And what we know is that with the generational wealth differences, sometimes, you know, folks who are from a historically excluded or marginalized community, they may make the same amount of money, but they have more student loans, they have less down payment. So this can really help bridge the gap. And we ran out of, they used all of the funds in the Inland Empire, the group that we were working with there exhausted the funds. We just authorized more funding for them. And in the East Bay, you know, we were working with a nonprofit there. They exhausted their funds. And I think NPS LA, so that's the LA organization, they still have some funding, but it's efficient. It's a great program. It was created by Housing Affordability Fund, and you know, it really was designed to, you know, really kind of offer a blueprint for how a really good closing cost grant can work. So that Alexia talked about the California state law that we actually sponsored to make implicit bias training a requirement that goes into effect in 2023. So that policy in and of itself was a C.A.R. initiative, but we've also added a CE training that we think is also pretty good to allow for folks to make sure that they meet that requirement. I see Alexia's kitty is really excited about it too. We also have you know, also in 2023, one of the parts of that new law is that fair housing training is going to have to have scenarios. So we've revised our state of California training to our CE training for fair housing, with the 45 hours of free training that we offer to our members to meet that requirement. And we're pretty excited about that version because it really gives real life scenarios of things that will happen that folks that will help, we think, help people get a better understanding of how to comply. We have some materials around the new appraisal bias law that came out in California that we helped shape. So there is a new law in California that requires real estate professionals to provide information to home buyers, homeowners, about how to make a complaint if there's an instance of possible appraisal bias. So if you look in our C.A.R. forms, if you go onto our website, you will find there's letters that help offer people information about that. There's forms. So we have tools to help folks comply with that law. We also have sponsored a law, and it's in place, and it went live over the summer to help people remove restrictive covenants in their property records or redact them. So every you go to your county assessor, and you can talk to your title companies, and they have the process for helping to remove the restrictive or redact the restrictive covenants in the property records. And then one final initiative that I'll mention, like I said, there are a lot, but is the California Dream for All program. So this is a part of the budget that C.A.R.'s government affairs staff supported that will fund additional homeownership programs and opportunities. And one of those programs is a shared equity down payment assistance program that help folks come in with the 20%. It's a silent second loan. It's a shared equity loan. So when you sell the home, there's a percentage that will need to be also paid into the fund to help additional homeowners. But we're really excited about that. And we hope it helps a lot of Californians. And then finally, I would be remiss. These are tools, but I do want to say, so we've had a long time. We've had our Steps Towards Homeownership program. Vilma's been involved in it. This is, an educational program for realtors to help them know all of the different down payment assistance programs and how they work. We have members talking about how they work with clients, as well as organizations like Cal HFA who have down payment assistance programs, banks, lenders, all kinds of folks like that. And if you also go to finddownpayment.car.org, you can find, and this is, kudos to Mark Farfel, who's also on my team, you can find a listing of every single down payment assistance program, even the tiny ones that, your clients might qualify for in a certain area. Just put in the area and it lists them. Even the local association ones that are funded by C.A.R.'s Housing Affordability Fund will show up there. So I'll stop with that and save the rest of mine for if there's one more question about resources.
Okay, Vilma.
Okay. Yes, Sarah, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing all this information with us. I'm so sorry. Today overlapped our meeting with the board of directors, and I'm here. I have to come early to join both. So, but my last question for you will be, where can realtors learn more about fair housing? What are some resources that you might suggest?
Alexia, do you want to start with that?
No, you go ahead, Farrah.
It's addressed. The questions addressed to both of you.
Okay, so I mentioned the toolkit, and I think I can put a link in the chat to the toolkit that really kind of gives some background information. It's just supplemental. Again, the advisory that is attached to all the contracts will give you more fair housing information. The CE training that we have so is a resource. We really intended for folks to learn the history, really start to understand all of the different fair housing laws in California. How do disability accommodations work? you know, how does one make sure that they are not doing the wrong thing when leasing, you know, renting out an apartment with the background checks and using the criminal data. You know, there's information about that. And then, of course, our implicit bias trainings. We also have fair housing and diversity forums and trainings and events. So at least, at the very minimum, every time we have board meetings, we have a fair housing and diversity forum. And as I mentioned, every single member is welcome to come to our board meetings. Often these are live streamed now, or you know, you can join by Zoom. So you can look on our website, and they're 3 times a year. Winter business meetings are in January or February. This time it's going to be February 2023. Ledge Day is something a lot of our community will know, but we have our board meetings at the same time. So if you're in Sacramento for Ledge Day in April, also you can go to some of these meetings. And then we have our fall business meetings, which we just had last week, and those happened in October. And we have fair housing and diversity forums at those meetings. And then I also want to mention, and they're not a C.A.R. resource, but we think that they're amazing. We rely on them, and I can mention them because we partner with all of these great multicultural organizations. And I'm talking about CAREB, that's the Realtist, the Black Real Estate Professionals Group, ARIA, the Asian Real Estate Association of America, NAREP, the Hispanic Real Estate Group, NORA, another Hispanic real estate group, the LGBTQ plus Alliance Real Estate. They all have reports that talk about, you know, some of the barriers, challenges, that, you know, and also statistics and studies. The ARIA report talks about some of the concerns, and also the LGBTQ plus report, the concerns of these consumers about safety. And so if you want to make sure that your business is inclusive and really addressing these needs, reading those reports can be really helpful. And then I saved not the best for last, but I saved a good one for last. And you'll find a lot of these resources on fairhousingcalifornia.org. And I'm going to see if I can really drop that one in the chat, because you know, some of the presentations we've talked about. Oh, and I see our webinars on there. Vilma's promoting us. So anyhow, fairhousingcalifornia.org. I'm surprised nobody else had taken the domain name. It's an amazing name, easy to remember. Just go there, and we're due for a bit of an update, but you'll see a lot of background information and data that we've talked about here today on that website.
I think Farrah's covered that question pretty comprehensively. We have a lot of great resources available on our website, nar.realtor/fairhousing. I do want to really promote our fair housing grants. I don't know if your association has made use of these this year, but there are 2 levels. And I'm going to put a link in here. So NAR will fund your association's fair housing activity. There's some info in the chat. Level 1 is for like an educational session, a book club, a training, a speaker. Level 2 is if you want to put on a symposium, co-brand a brochure, an education project with your local fair housing group. So use our funds to advance fair housing in your community. And I'll leave it with that.
Excellent. Well, I have a question, and that is, we've talked about fair housing. We've talked about both history that led to the establishment of fair housing. We've talked about the elements. We've talked about protected classes. Tell us what happens should a realtor run afoul of fair housing regulations. What are the potential penalties that one might face?
I don't know. So what I will say is that, some of these questions are gonna, we can only really answer them very generally, because, some of them you'd probably want to get legal advice to find out if something really rises to the level of a violation and what kind of violation. But one thing, and here's one great thing about the toolkit, and it's posted in the chat, is that it lists a lot of the different places you can make a complaint. And so one thing that not everyone knows is that because our code of ethics actually covers some of these fair housing requirements, if someone thinks that they're working with a realtor and a realtor has engaged in some sort of fair housing violation, particularly of the code of ethics, which is more extensive than federal law, then they can file with the an ethics complaint with the realtors local association. And then other places are, so that used to be called the California Department of Fair Employment and Housing, and now it's like the Civil Rights Department, I think is their name. So that is the state department that enforces both the state, and I believe there's an agreement with HUD to enforce federal fair housing laws. And if you look in the toolkit, and these are old numbers, but I will say, last year's numbers were, there's different gradations. First violation, it's one thing, it's like over $20,000 of a penalty, but then there could be, and Alexia could probably answer this better for me, and up to over $100,000 for multiple violations. That's federal law, and you also have state law penalties. But Alexia, I'm going to kick it over to you to talk about some of the other penalties that might exist besides the ones that I just mentioned.
So if a consumer thinks that they have been discriminated against, they have a number of options to get that complaint investigated. They can bring a complaint to HUD. And as Farrah mentioned, HUD has an agreement with your state civil rights agency that your state will investigate. They can also go to a private fair housing group and get that complaint investigated for free. And with HUD, it's also a free investigation for the consumer. Or they can just go ahead and hire their own private attorney and bring a lawsuit against you in state or federal court. So Farrah mentioned those fines. If you go through the proceedings and are adjudicated that you have violated the Fair Housing Act, you might get hit with a fine, but you also need to know about compensatory damages. So let's say somebody has sold their house and they're getting ready to move into the new place, and something goes on with the new place and they can't get in because of discrimination, and now they got to go live in a hotel for 6 months. You're paying the cost of that. Let's say that they have a pain and suffering. They had migraines, they have a stroke, they had to take their kid out of school, their kid has problems. That can all be covered in a fair housing judgment. So make sure you're not just looking at the fines. The judgments, the goal of the judgment is to make the plaintiff whole. So any harm that they suffered as a result of the discrimination, the judgment is going to try and reimburse them for that harm.
That is excellent information, Alexia. Did you say about this is going to be recorded, and so it's hard for me to hear, but it's going to be recorded, so I'll be looking forward to get that information.
The rent there was like $3,000 a month, so it was like.
And if you can also enhance a little bit more about the grant, the grants for NAR is up to $5,000, I believe.
They have actually raised the amounts, I guess, for inflation. So it's now going up to, I think, $7,500 for the level 2. And maybe 3,000 for the level 1, I think, keeping up with the times.
And, just a plug for these grants, and I think we're gonna probably bring some of our grants back, but what some associations can do with these grants is, have a speaker, that charges, do an implicit bias training, pay for that, for a group of members or maybe the board. There's all kinds of different kind of activities that can be done with these grants that really can support, greater education around fair housing. Any other, Alexia, I'm interested.
They can also support advocacy. So let's say that you want to write a statute in your, and bring it to your city council about some fair housing issue in your community. The grant could support the cost of you hiring a consultant, and we have a consultant on retainer to do that legislative drafting for you. It can also support, your partnerships with different community groups. So there's a lot the grants can support beyond education, although that's probably what they're used for the most.
That's true. You can have a joint event or support a home ownership workshop that is in conjunction. I know some associations do partner with the local chapters, the multicultural groups. And I do think those can be really powerful event. And I do want to make another plug for our Housing Affordability Fund grants as well. You know, if an association wants to develop a first-time homebuyer program, there's a lot of different ways you might do that, you know, with like a closing cost grant or paying for HOA dues, like we had a statewide one, or paying for our appliances, or, you know, there's different things you can do. And also special purpose credit programs, you know, are another thing that, you know, depending, and it's one of those things you got to look at the regulation to make sure you're crafting it in line. There's a great toolkit from National Fair Housing Alliance, so NAFA, look them up, that can help if you do want to create some sort of program. It is the kind of thing that if brought to us by a local association at the Housing Affordability Fund, they will look at. You know, I can't say they will approve for sure, but you know, they do have grants for that kind of thing. And I also put our legal hotline in the chat, because we were talking about, you know, where do people go? What do people do? If any of our members have a question about something and they think it might be a fair housing violation, you can also call Transaction Rescue or reach out to Mark Farfel with something related to the transaction. Both of those resources can help you identify, you know, what are some, if this is a fair housing issue, was this potentially a violation, and what might be the next steps?
Excellent. Well, you know, we've come to within a couple minutes of our allocated time here. I just want to turn to the participants in the audience if there happen to be any questions or comments that they wish raised at this time.
Hey, first of all, thank you. Sorry, thank you. I didn't realize my hand was raised, but thank you, Howard and Farrah and Vilma and Alexia. Thank you for being here. Wondered the great resources that you put in the chat. We cannot save the chat. Is there any way that we could change that? Because I definitely love to keep all of these resources. Is that possible?
That's more a SRA, our staff technical question.
Okay.
Than is in my means. But I would say, as I've done here, is that I've clicked on all the links, opened them on my computer, so that I can readily access them following this webinar.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I have an email prepared for Farrah, but maybe since you called on me, I used to run an affordable housing community. We 118 unit seniors, and we accepted Section 8, but I wasn't aware of any home ownership programs. Could you share where that resource is and where I can find it? Because I'm working on a brief right now for the city.
Yes, and so I'm familiar with the Alameda County Section 8 home ownership program, and it's because a friend of mine in the real estate community, she's actually a realtor. I think when the market, I don't know if this was why, but I started right when the market was crashing last time around 2007. So she worked for the Alameda County Housing Authority, and they were the ones who were administering the Section 8 homeownership program. Now, I would say that it is more difficult to use as the prices go up, and I'm not sure, you know, how much staffing and resources are being put into these programs at each particular housing authority, but it should be housed at the county housing authority. And so whoever is administering the Section 8 rental voucher program should also have information about the home ownership program. And my understanding is that they have like matching accounts. Like, it's pretty awesome. You can use a voucher for renting, and you can also use it for home ownership.
And it's at each county, you believe?
Yeah, it should be wherever Section 8 is administered, and usually I think that's the county. So I would check with your Section 8 whoever is administering Section 8 in your county.
Yeah. Thank you. I will look for it. Thank you. They do a lot of great things in Alameda County. It's just like Otto was talking about the Goodness Village recently. Last week. That is amazing. Okay. Thank you so much, you guys. I appreciate it. Learned a lot. Thank you.
Thanks for attending, Renee. We appreciate it. Yeah.
Howard,
Vilma, you have any closing thoughts or words? Vilma?
Thank you so much, everybody. I'm so sorry. I had to come here early because we have the board directors meeting. So I wanted to be on time. But I do thank you very much, Farrah and Alexia. You have gave us knowledge that we will never really had idea that all of this is happening. And now we have the resources. We know where to go to find it. Thank you so much. And for those people who registered, I believe they're going to be getting the recording. So that's one thing that I will be looking forward to. And the grants, so much information. Thank you for taking your time to attend our event. And thank you, Howard, for hosting the event. And all I can say is thank you. And if you, Farrah and Alexia, can stay for a minute after we sign off, it will be great.
Well, and then I would like to add my additional thanks to the both of you, to Alexia and Farrah. I think the information that you have shared with us today is invaluable to real estate practitioners. And my closing words to our membership, and for that matter, to all real estate professionals, is make sure that you are cognizant of fair housing regulations. Make sure that it is top of mind that you deal with all clients fairly, accommodating all clients' desires, wishes, provide them with the same equal opportunities, equal information, and equal things. And I would just say also to our members and all real estate professionals is please be collegial competitors and employ what I titled the 3 C's: to communicate, to cooperate, and to collaborate, in order to avoid a 4th C, which is conflict. So I think that is a very successful formula. And further, if you deal in your business dealings every single day, and you come from a place that's genuine and from service, you will be successful in this business. And your association at Southland Regional Association of Realtors is here to support you in your efforts. So thank you very much. Appreciate having you all, and we will end the recording now.